Welcome to another Pollock Academy minisode where we're going to take a deep dive into women's roles during World War II. In my Homefront video, I mentioned the women who took jobs in the defense industry factories, represented by Rosie the Riveter. Real quick, did you know that there were other characters that these industries were trying to make happen, just like Rosie? We had Winnie the Welder in Gary, Indiana, and my favorite, in Canada, we had Ronnie the Bren Gun Girl. She looks pretty cool to me. Okay, for this video, let's focus our attention not on the factories, but on the actual military units in uniform. Historically, women could not take combat roles in the military, but before World War II, in the late 1930s, there was talks about adding women's auxiliary units to the armed forces. A year after the U.S. entered World War II, each branch of the military had alphabet soup-like women's groups. There were the WACs, or the WACs, in the Army. The Marines had the WRs, or Women's Reserves. The Coast Guard had the SPARs. The Navy had the WAVs, pretty on the nose, and the Air Force had the WASPs. Hey everyone, quick pause in the video because I want to share my inspiration for looking up these women's auxiliary units. In April 2021, the WNBA and Nike had to retract an alternate jersey from the Dallas Wings. Now, this jersey did honor the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP, and it was based on this plane, the P-40 Warhawk. This plane was built in Texas and it was test flown by the female pilots. The WASP was a groundbreaking auxiliary unit. It allowed women to do semi-combat roles, like piloting planes or flying supplies overseas. But this unit only barely had a handful of women of color, and it openly rejected every African-American applicant. It wasn't just the Air Force that had an issue with race. During World War II, the military is still segregated, and a majority of these women's auxiliary groups didn't let in black women till late 1944. These units often recruited women for traditional domestic or healthcare jobs, but we did see some units recruit hands-on and advanced roles, such as radio communication in the WAVs, atomic research for the Manhattan Project in the WACs, and we even saw American-born Japanese and Chinese women serving as translators. Recent decades have revealed the racism and sexism these women's units felt during their service, as well as the injustice of the military not even recognizing them as members of the military, but just as civilian employees, denying benefits. We'll wrap this up with a group that I find interesting and a group that's been making the news. First, a group that I find interesting was the SPARs. They were a group of only 10,000 women who volunteered their service for the United States Coast Guard, and we have a Coast Guard base right down the road. The Coast Guard even then was the smallest branch of the military, and in order to recruit women, they had some pretty interesting tactics. Let's look at this recruitment poster. Don't be a spare, be a SPAR. Here we have a woman of the day who packed a bag, grabbed a uniform, and rushed to join the SPARs. And let's look at the text at the bottom. This is really interesting. Release a fighting Coast Guardsman for combat. Well, okay, that's normal. Next we have train at the Palm Beach Biltmore. Woohoo, fancy. This luxury hotel was built in 1927 and is still there today as condos and wear clothes designed by Mayne Bacher, who was a Chicago-born fashion designer whose popular company designed the women's uniforms of these auxiliary units. Very chic. Finally, let's look at one of these units that's making the news today. I'm talking about the 6888 Postal Battalion of the Women's Army Corps. This was the only all-black female unit to serve overseas. These 850 women started their training at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and made their way to Birmingham, England in 1945. It was there that they were tasked with sorting and organizing years and years of backlogged and undelivered mail for Allied soldiers. This battalion created efficient systems that sorted through an average of 65,000 pieces of mail for these Allied soldiers in a matter of only 3 months. They operated under the slogan, "No mail, low morale." These women were so good that once Allies claimed victory in Europe, they were sent to Rouen, France to do the same exact thing. At the end of February 2022, the House passed legislation awarding the women of the Postal Battalion the Congressional Gold Medal, which is one of the highest civilian honors in America. These women's units serve with dignity and patriotism as part of the war effort, and their contributions would influence the armed forces in the future. In 1948, women became fixtures of the armed forces with the passing of the Women's Armed Services Integration Act. Thank you for listening to Pollock Academy.